The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The story opens by introducing an 80-year-old mansion standing alone against its hills, holding darkness within. It is a building without kindness, a place where no live organism could sanely exist under conditions of absolute reality. Fascinated by its grim reputation, Dr. John Montague, a meticulous, rosy-cheeked and bearded scholar, rents the estate for the summer to find scientific proof of the supernatural. He invites several guests with past exposure to paranormal events, but only 2 young women accept. They are joined by Luke Sanderson, the young heir to the property, who is a charming, witty, and well-dressed young man with a self-proclaimed reputation as a liar and a thief. One of the women is Eleanor Vance, a 32-year-old who has spent the last 11 years in bitter, repressed isolation, caring for her demanding, now-deceased mother. Timid, mousy, highly imaginative, and desperate for a sense of belonging, Eleanor lives a meager life sleeping on a cot in her sister's home, constantly belittled by her sibling and brother-in-law. Seizing her one chance at rebellion and adventure, she ignores their strict orders, steals the car she co-owns with her sister, and sets off for the estate. Her drive is a joyous, dreamlike liberation. She weaves rich fantasies of magic, quaint cottages, and new beginnings, completely unaware of the psychological trap waiting for her. Her optimism falters only slightly when she passes through a nearby village where the locals are hostile and tight-lipped, and when she is met at the estate gates by Dudley, the grinning, malicious groundskeeper who seems to delight in her unease. Upon arriving at the mansion, Eleanor is confronted by the grim visage of the building and the hostile caretaker, Mrs. Dudley. Mrs. Dudley is a cold, rigid woman who speaks only in mechanical, repetitive sentences, insisting on her strict schedule and reminding Eleanor that no one will be around to hear her scream in the night. Inside, the architecture is suffocating and confusingly laid out. Eleanor's initial panic is eased when she meets the other female guest, Theodora. In stark contrast to the repressed Eleanor, Theodora is vibrant, radiant, and bohemian, dressed in bright yellows and possessing a sharp, amused demeanor. The 2 women bond instantly, exploring the grounds like giddy schoolgirls, and are soon joined by Luke and Dr. Montague. For a brief moment, the 4 form a cozy surrogate family, sharing a pleasant dinner and feeling brave in the warmth of the drawing room fire. That evening, Dr. Montague shares the grim history of the estate. Built by a bitter, eccentric man named Hugh Crane, the property is stained by tragedy, including the sudden deaths of Crane's wives and a lifelong vindictive feud between his 2 daughters over their inheritance. The older daughter eventually died in the home, and her young village companion who inherited it was so relentlessly tormented by the younger sister that she eventually hanged herself from the library tower. The doctor warns them that the mansion is a place of contained ill will, advising them to leave immediately if they feel it catching at them. The group, however, bravely agrees to stay. The next day is spent exploring the disorienting, windowless inner rooms and the bizarre layout of the property. The doctor explains that the mansion is a masterpiece of architectural misdirection. Every angle is slightly off, causing a subtle, maddening distortion of balance, and the heavy doors are designed to swing shut on their own. The twisted psychology of the estate's origins is further revealed when Luke discovers a scrapbook in the library made by Hugh Crane for his daughter. Signed in Crane's own blood, the book is filled with terrifying moral lessons and gruesome illustrations of hell and eternal damnation, meant to frighten his child into a life of pure virtue. They also discover a spot of inexplicable freezing cold outside the desolate nursery, but the true horror begins that night. Eleanor and Theodora are awakened in the pitch black by a deafening, hollow pounding. It sounds as though someone is striking the heavy wooden doors in the hallway with an iron cannonball. The terrifying noise moves methodically down the hall and stops directly outside their room, accompanied by a sickening, freezing cold that seeps beneath the door. As the unseen entity fondles the doorknob and violently rattles the frame, a thin, lunatic giggle drifts through the air. When the terror finally subsides, they learn that Luke and the doctor heard nothing. The men had been lured outside by a phantom dog, leaving the women isolated and trapped. The dark forces are already executing a plan to separate them. As the days pass, the psychological toll begins to show, specifically targeting Eleanor's fragile mind. While walking in the hallway, they discover a massive, straggling message written in chalk on the wall, demanding that Eleanor come home. Eleanor is horrified, feeling that she is being singled out and consumed by her surroundings. She lashes out at Theodora, suspecting her of a cruel prank, and the once idyllic friendship between the 2 women fractures into passive-aggressive bickering. The supernatural attacks quickly escalate. One afternoon, Theodora playfully paints Eleanor's toenails red, an act that makes the repressed Eleanor feel exposed and wicked, further straining her nerves. Shortly after, they open Theodora's bedroom door to find the room soaked in a foul-smelling substance resembling blood, completely ruining her clothes, with another message for Eleanor smeared across the wallpaper.
Theodora is forced to move into Eleanor's room and wear her clothes, physically blurring the boundaries between their identities and increasing Eleanor's deep-seated resentment and paranoia that she is being mocked. Eleanor's grip on reality loosens further. One night, while sleeping in the shared room, she awakens in absolute darkness to the sound of a child crying and a voice babbling in a low, steady, gloating tone. Terrified by the cruel sounds, Eleanor blindly reaches out and grips Theodora's hand, holding it tight as the agonizing noises continue. When Eleanor finally musters the courage to scream for it to stop, the lights suddenly switch on. She looks across the room to see Theodora sitting up in her own bed, far away from her. Eleanor is left with the bone-chilling realization that whatever hand she was holding in the dark did not belong to a human. The oppressive atmosphere soon drives Eleanor and Theodora outside for a tense, silent walk toward the brook, their relationship now a web of unspoken jealousy and fear. As night falls, the path inexplicably alters, and the surrounding trees turn a ghastly, luminous white against a thick black sky. Eleanor is consumed by a mindless, shivering terror. The path leads them to a hallucinatory vision of a sunlit, colorful garden where a phantom family enjoys a picnic. Theodora looks back, sees something unspeakable that Eleanor misses, and screams for them to run. They flee back indoors in a state of sheer panic, further isolating Eleanor in her quiet desperation for a place to belong. The eerie rhythm of their isolation is shattered by the arrival of Dr. Montague's wife and her traveling companion, Arthur Parker. Mrs. Montague is a domineering, arrogant woman who fancies herself a superior spiritualist, while Arthur is a pompous, red-faced headmaster who speaks in aggressive cliches. Dismissive of her husband's careful scientific methods, Mrs. Montague immediately takes over, insisting on sleeping in the dreaded haunted nursery and conducting a séance with a planchette. The device produces a stream of repetitive, disjointed messages, once again calling out for Eleanor by name and identifying the spirit as a lost child searching for its mother. Eleanor feels the unseen eyes of the property and her companions pressing heavily upon her, realizing that she is the focal point of the haunting. That night, Mrs. Montague and Arthur demand to be left alone in the nursery, while the original four huddle in the doctor's room. An unseen force unleashes its most violent assault yet, skipping the arrogant newcomers entirely and focusing all its fury on the doctor's room. The deafening pounding returns, shaking the very foundations of the mansion. The doors threaten to buckle, the floor tilts and rocks, and a lunatic shouting echoes through the halls. While Luke and the doctor brace the door, and Theodora tries to remain calm, Eleanor internally surrenders. Mentally battered and exhausted by her lifelong loneliness, she decides she no longer wants to fight. She yields her will entirely, embracing the terrifying chaos as her ultimate destiny. By her final night, Eleanor has completely detached from reality, believing she has unlocked the secret of the haunting and that she is finally being welcomed home. While the others sleep, she slips out of her room and dances barefoot through the darkened, echoing halls. She knocks on the doors of her sleeping companions, teasingly evading them as they wake and frantically search the corridors. Completely lost to the spell, Eleanor enters the dreaded library, a room she had previously been unable to stomach due to its rotting scent. She climbs the precarious, decaying iron spiral staircase that leads to the top of the tower, the very spot where the tragic companion had taken her own life. As the rusted structure shakes and groans under her feet, Luke risks his own life, climbing up the terrifying height to coax her down. Eleanor is confused by their panic, feeling entirely safe in the embrace of the dark walls, but she peacefully allows Luke to guide her back to the stone floor. The next morning, the group realizes that Eleanor is in grave danger and must be sent away immediately for her own survival. They pack her bags and bring her car to the front steps. Eleanor protests wildly, realizing she has no home, no family, and nowhere to go in the outside world. She begs to stay, insisting that she belongs there. Dr. Montague is unyielding, knowing her life depends on leaving the grounds. They force her into her car and bid her a final goodbye, hoping that distance will break the psychological hold she is under. As Eleanor slowly drives down the winding driveway, she is consumed by the realization that she did not have to leave. She feels a triumphant surge of control, believing she is making her own absolute choice for the first time in her life. Gripping the steering wheel, she deliberately presses the accelerator to the floor and steers the car directly toward the massive ancient tree at the curve of the drive. In the final, unending, crashing fraction of a second before impact, the illusion shatters. She is struck by a moment of terrible clarity, wondering why she is doing this, and why did they not stop her. Following her tragic deaths, the survivors scatter, leaving the estate entirely. The doctor's research is discredited, and the mansion is left standing alone against its hills, holding its darkness within, just as it has for 80 years.